Okay, everyone. Well, it's 7 o'clock. We might get started. But before we commence, in the spirit of reconciliation, P&C Federation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So welcome, everyone, to tonight's webinar. It's really lovely that you could all join us this evening. My name's Natalie Walker, and I'm the President of the New South Wales P&C Federation. And I'll be facilitating tonight's webinar, How to Improve Teen Sleep Habits and Mental Health. If you'd like to activate the live transcript for this webinar, please go to the icon at the bottom of the screen and just click on Enable Auto Transcription. P&C Federation is very pleased to be hosting this Black Dog Institute webinar on how to improve sleep habits and mental health, to provide our parents and our carers with just some of the strategies that they can implement at home and to support their teens in setting up healthy sleep habits. And it is so positive, to see everyone here with us tonight. We've had great registrations coming through and wanting to talk about mental health. But just a reminder that sometimes these shared stories can raise issues for some, and we really encourage you to just reach out for support for yourselves or your loved ones. Just remember you're not alone, and there are a lot of avenues where you can find support. And we'll drop some of these in the contacts and their contacts in the chat for you now. So I'd now like to welcome tonight's presenters from the Black Dog Institute. We have Dr. Eliza Werner-Seidler, Associate Professor and Head of Population Mental Health, and Dr. Christine Kafer, Clinical Psychologist, Facilitator and Senior Psychology Content Developer. So after the presentation, there will be some time to ask the panel your questions, but just please remember to post your questions through the Q&A option on the bottom of your screen. And please remember just to use the vote up option if you have a similar question. Please don't use the Q&A for your commentary, just use the chat function for that. And we do have some staff from the P&C Federation and Black Dog Institute here tonight with us behind the scenes, just to assist with the Q&A and chat. In regards to respectful communication, I'd also just like to remind everyone, please don't name individuals or schools in your comments, and just to please be respectful of others in your comments and conscious of what other people might be struggling with. So now I'll hand over to Dr. Chris Kafer just to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Natalie. And we're absolutely delighted to be here again. We ran a webinar about navigating teen mental health last year, so we're really pleased to be back and able to share this webinar and this content with you tonight. So we have some questions that we thought might be interesting to have answered, but we would also love to hear from you, and we'll endeavour to answer some of those questions as we're speaking, if they kind of fit into the conversation. And as Natalie said, we'll also be having some time for questions at the end as well. So please pop your questions in the Q&A as we're going along. So fantastic to have Eliza here, and my job is really easy because I'm just going to be asking questions and learning lots of fascinating stuff, so that's not too bad, is it? So welcome, Eliza. And I thought we might just get started to hear from you how you got interested in researching sleep and teenagers.
Yeah, sure. I actually think that I get to do the fun part because I get to talk about sleep, which is something that is really interesting and so relevant to all of us, both as parents and carers, but also ourselves. In every 24-hour cycle, we all need to sleep. And so I think it's a really interesting area. And certainly over the last 10 to 20 years or so, the importance of sleep in mental health has really come to the fore for both researchers and clinicians. And I think we've got sort of broad recognition across the community about the importance of sleep as one of the pillars of both physical health and mental health. But let me answer your question. So I'm actually a psychologist by training, and I guess I stumbled on sleep by accident. So I do a lot of work with schools looking at prevention and early intervention programs for young people's common mental health problems, so emerging symptoms of anxiety and depression. And I got a bit of pushback from some of the schools that I was working with around some programs that I was trying to introduce around these mental health problems. And frequently the request was, can we have an easier entry point? Can you talk about nutrition, or is there anything around physical activity or sleep? And can we focus on some of these lifestyle factors before we go in and start talking about suicidality, depression, and so on? And I guess that really led me down a rabbit hole that I've been going down for about a decade or so now, looking into sleep and the relationship of sleep and mental health. So we know for young people, often sleep difficulties are the first thing that start to deteriorate when a young person is going to go on to experience a mental health problem. It doesn't mean that having sleep problems necessarily means that you are going to go on and have a mental health problem, but it is a common precursor. And so I guess the good news about that is if we can treat sleep problems early, we can actually reduce the risk of a young person going on to experience a mental health problem. And that was a very compelling argument for me to kind of investigate and take a look at the research and actually start doing my own research in the area. So it really has been only the last decade or so that there's been kind of any funding and research looking at how you can actually treat sleep and what are the secondary effects on reducing mental health problems. And the data is really encouraging. So if you do get in early, and then we do have outstanding interventions for sleep problems, if people can access those and implement those, you actually can reduce the risk of the onset of mental health problems kind of, into the future, which is really great.
Yeah, that's very exciting, isn't it? Because often, we can feel a little bit hopeless around the rising rates of mental health problems in young people. So to know that we could be intervening earlier and at a broad scale is very exciting.
Yeah. I guess the other point that I will make about it is there seems to be a lot less stigma associated with talking about sleep difficulties compared to mental health difficulties. And I've done some qualitative work with adolescents to get their own perspective and also parent groups. And there does seem to be a much more much greater engagement and likelihood to seek help for a sleep problem compared to a mental health problem where there is still a lot of that stigma. So I think that's another kind of really nice entry point into looking for help for around, your basic mental health care, I suppose.
And I mean, we'll get onto this later, but that, there can often be delays and difficulty accessing help for mental health issues for young people and their families. But some of the sleep resources that are available are there and ready to use, which makes a huge difference, doesn't it? Rather than waiting to see a GP or waiting to see a psychologist.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's a good time of year to be talking about trying to get kids' sleep habits back on track after the school holidays. My kids are a lot older, but we still struggle with that sort of thing. How much sleep do kids actually need?
Yeah, so look, the first thing to say about this is every child is different and their sleep needs are different. And so, that's the broad context within which we need to consider the guidelines. For school-age children aged 6 to 13 years, it's 9 to 11 hours is the recommended amount of sleep. Once you get to 14 to 17 years, that goes down to 8 to 10 hours. And beyond 17 years and into adulthood, that's 7 to 9 hours. So I guess a useful metric that we usually use or look for is the proportion of young people who get the recommended 8 hours of sleep in adolescence as the lower threshold. But I guess what I would really want to share and make clear to parents is that we've got at least 25% to 30% of young people currently reporting not getting those 8 hours of sleep. So if that is your child, you are not alone. There is, that's nearly a third of the population not getting the minimum recommended sleep, which is quite concerning. There has been a trend. So there's been some really high quality longitudinal studies bringing together, thousands and thousands of young people, both in Australia and across Europe. And what we've seen is between the years of 2005 and 2015, there's been about a doubling in the number of young people reporting not getting the minimum 8 hours of sleep. So this is kind of a trend, and it's a reliable trend. And we see a similar trend with rising rates of mental health problems as well in young people.
Yeah, wow. And you say that there's variability. How would you know if yourself or one of your kids needed less or more sleep, what sort of things would you be seeing in them that might indicate they're not getting enough sleep?
Yeah, look, it's really tricky because teenagers are obviously going through huge amounts of change, developmentally, their biology, going through puberty. And so it can be hard to differentiate, what's a grumpy teenager and what's a very tired teenager. But I guess it's the recurrence and the kind of chronicity. Is your young person like always tired? Is it extremely difficult for them to get up in the morning? Are you finding them napping when they come home from school? Is their kind of sleep wake cycle inconsistent? And then there are things like, cognitive function, being able to concentrate at school, being able to engage socially. Once there's a significant impact on kind of activities of daily life, then that's where you would be concerned about kind of a significant sleep problem.
Yeah, definitely. It's those sort of impacts on those everyday activities, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so what are the most common sleep disorders?
Yeah, so for young people, there are two kind of, I suppose, that really jump out. So the most common sleep disorder across the board is insomnia, and that's the clinical term. But what it really means is having difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep or waking up too early. And it's associated with some level of daytime impairment, so fatigue and tiredness during the day. I guess the thing about insomnia is it's the failure to get enough good quality sleep despite the opportunity to do so. I think we've all probably had the experience of lying in bed, trying to fall asleep at night. The harder you try, the less likely sleep is to come. And what it is it's prolonged, so it's over a significant period of time. It's not 1 or 2 nights of bad sleep. It's actually when it becomes, you're looking at weeks and months that is classified as insomnia disorder. And that affects only about 4% of adolescents, which is encouraging because that's a pretty small number. But we do have about 40% of young people reporting at least a symptom of insomnia. So that's kind of not yet a clinical disorder, but there's some kind of sleep difficulty. There's some difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. It's probably not interfering too much, but I guess left untreated, these things can definitely accumulate. The other thing that I want to talk about is delayed sleep-wake phase disorder. And this is something which with parents of teenagers on the line, I guess I want to give a shout out to our young people, because there is a biological reason around puberty their sleep-wake cycle actually shifts. So they get tired later. So we have circadian rhythms, and I can talk more about that if it's of interest to you. But basically, we have this natural sleep-wake cycle. When it's light, we receive light through our optic nerves at the back of our eyes. That tells our internal body clock that it's time to be alert and awake. And then as the day progresses, you develop what's called like sleep debt or sleep pressure. And then when it gets to nighttime, you feel tired, you can go to sleep. There is a natural shift in young people's circadian rhythm around puberty, which means that they don't feel tired until later. And that's a biological thing. There are social reasons. They might want to stay up late talking to their friends. They might need to stay up late doing their assignments, but there is a biological reason for that shift, and it involves a shift of more than 2 hours. But then they still have to get up for school in the morning. So they still have to get up for, extracurricular activities, sports, school. And so I guess when you do see this shift in their sleeping patterns, it's very easy to not get enough sleep because the time they have to get up remains the same. And then what you see happens on weekends is you have your teenager sleeping till lunchtime on a Saturday. And that's actually pretty unhelpful. So shifting, you can't actually catch up on sleep in that way, and shifting your sleep cycle by more than 2 hours is really unhelpful for your circadian rhythm. So I guess the advice that I have is, on the weekends, if you can limit the sleep into 2 hours later than usual, that's a good thing. Any more than that, it's going to be disruptive to getting that cycle back on track.
Yeah, it's so tricky, isn't it? And this sort of speaks to a question that's popped up in the chat is, how do we motivate our teenagers to recognise the importance of sleep? How do we support them as parents to try to make them help them make healthier choices in the evening? Julia's put in the chat that her teens want to keep on gaming to the very last minute, and it's a real battle every night to put limits around that and to get them to wind down before going to sleep. Any tips on how to get them to own a healthy bedtime routine to kind of be motivated to assist with making that happen?
Look, that's the money question,
It is,
Chris.
isn't it? Yeah.
Look, I think, again, it's really individualized. Like, I would encourage you to have a conversation with your young person, you know, find out from them how they're sleeping, find out, you know, if they are in their room gaming and you may not sort of, you know all the ins and outs of, you know, how much sleep they're actually getting, try and engage with them in a conversation and find ways that you can kind of educate them or learn about sleep together in a way that they care about. So some young people really care about sports performance. If you have a young athlete, you know, not getting enough sleep can have significant impacts on performance. And there's a whole range of research and, you know, really cool studies to support that. If your young person's really worried about their grades or performing well at school, concentration, memory, these are things that sleep is critically important for. If young people care a lot about their appearance or their physical health, again, I guess, you know, the two sides of this is sleep is important for pretty much every, you know, positive health outcome. But it also means that you've got lots of different ways that you can kind of sell the importance of sleep to young people. So finding a hook, finding something that they care about, and then looking at how sleep might affect that. I guess, you know, there is this struggle between, you know, parents and teens. You've got young people with increasing autonomy over their bedtimes, and it really is about kind of educating and giving them the tools and the skills to make positive choices around their sleep rather than enforcing them. I guess, like, one thing I will say that's kind of counter to that is, you know, the research has shown that young people who have an actual bedtime get more sleep. So I wouldn't want to be negotiating with a 17-year-old over their bedtime, but certainly if you have younger children and you can kind of set up healthy sleep routines with a consistent bedtime, that hopefully is something that might stick into the later years. But I guess, you know, this question has touched upon something which I am almost certain will come up, which is around the role of screens and tech use and social media and how this interacts with sleep. So Chris, you tell me, is now a good time to jump into that one?
Oh, look, there was just one other comment in the chat was that, you know, some parents have tried multiple conversations, and look, I totally relate to that. And sometimes it just kind of has to, with young people, get to a tipping point where it starts to matter for them, and that can be quite ugly to watch, can't it? Because the collateral damage can go on for quite a long time, and if you're living with a grumpy, cranky, sleep-deprived teenager until it gets to the point that it is starting to impact on them in a way that they're motivated to change. Yeah, really tricky though.
Yeah, the readiness to change is really important. And, you know, like, you know, you've got some quite, you know, strong, increasingly independent young people. It's not going to work imposing strict rules that they're simply not going to follow. So it really is. And sometimes, yeah, it needs to get much worse before it gets better. And that's really hard for families. I mean, poor sleep and not enough sleep and, you know, arguments around sleep, that, you know, it can have a real impact on family dynamics, relationships. And I guess just, you know, keeping in mind, you also don't want to make it such a huge deal. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you need the young person to be able to come to you and say, actually, this is now a problem, or I'm not coping, or I just cannot get up for school. And I think often we see sort of clinically, you know, once young people can't make it to school on time or start doing poorly at their work, or, you know, like that can also be a hook to look at, you know, your whole kind of circadian rhythm and sleep-wake cycle and start to implement some changes. Because the good news is the interventions and the treatments to improve sleep are actually very behavioural, and they're actually very good and easy to implement. As a clinician, it's much easier to deliver a sleep intervention than, say, an intervention, a psychological intervention for depression or anxiety. So if I have someone who comes with both sleep issues and a comorbid mental health problem, I'm going to start with the sleep issues, and actually a lot of the other stuff is going to improve as a kind of secondary effect.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah. And also I think as parents too, it's good to reflect on what are your sleep routines like, because what we're modeling to our children is what they take on board. So you know, if you can't do a lot perhaps around your teens at the moment, thinking about, well, what am I modeling? What can I do to improve, you know, my nighttime wind down routines, or how I, you know, manage my sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point, because they will look to you for guidance. I suppose they'll never tell you, but
That's
they'll
right. You'll never know that.
yeah, you'll never know, but they're still absorbing, they're like a sponge. They're still absorbing, and they see, you turning off the TV and taking out a book, having a shower, a cup of tea, whatever it is that you do before bed. And hopefully we'll be able to talk more about routines, because they're just so important.
Yeah, so let's get onto that issue that everybody wants to know. Are screens the bad guys? Is that what's causing all the sleep problems in our teenagers?
Look, again, it's not a yes or no answer. I think it's a very easy culprit to hang all of this onto. And I want to tell you about the research and kind of leave it to you to make the decisions. There is evidence that if young people have devices in their room, they will get less sleep. So there is good reason to expect that they will spend more time on their phones often than they anticipated to, or their tablets or whatever it is they're using, and that displaces sleep. So we've all probably had the experience, we're lying in bed, we're scrolling something, and then 45 minutes has passed, and look at the time. So that's the same for our young people. And so I guess, devices out of rooms does lead to longer sleep. But again, that's something that you're going to have to work out within your family and with your child. I want to say there's been a lot of coverage in the media around the role of like light and blue screens. The evidence really isn't there yet. So the hypothesis is that the light from your screens, the blue screens, it prevents the secretion of melatonin, and melatonin's a hormone that is secreted when it's dark, and essentially it makes you feel sleepy. You may have heard of melatonin. People who have sleep difficulties often take it to help them fall asleep. The evidence really does not support this idea that bright lights from screens prevents the secretion of melatonin. So I guess that's one thing. We've heard about blue light glasses and whatnot. Yeah, the science isn't there yet. It's more, I think the problem is it's more what young people are doing on their screens. So if you are if you're on social media, you're looking at Instagram, there's like really cool pictures of your friends from a party on Saturday night. You think back to what a great time you had, start thinking about your interactions with somebody that day. Like that is a very stimulating activity, like way more than reading a book, for example. And so that's going to get you excited. You're thinking about your friends, you're thinking about going out. Like that is not conducive to kind of a calm mind and body that's going to lead to sleep. And so I think it's more about the content, like what young people are doing. If they're texting their friends and waiting for responses, and I speak to a lot of young people that, they really have this fear of missing out. If they go to sleep and their friends are still texting on groups, they're not going to see that till the morning. Goodness gracious me, and I do a lot of work with young people on testing out whether it's as bad as what they think it's going to be. If you put your device away and you wait until the morning, you get a better night's sleep, and then you see everything from last night, and you're going to see your friends in an hour or two after waking. So I guess it's more educating young people. Like I'm actually quite surprised often when I work with different, youth advisory groups and young people from my studies, and they're really interested in learning about sleep health and, how they can be more responsible with their devices and kind of taking that on. And so I guess it's keeping that in mind and asking them, well, what do you think is going to happen if you are watching TikTok videos before, right before you go to sleep, or trying to create your own content? And I guess maybe kind of sharing some of that decision making about the best way to use screens. I do also want to say there's no evidence that watching TV before you go to sleep has any effect on sleep. So I think it's not screens per se. That's quite a passive activity. Reading a book is recommended to help you fall asleep, nothing too exciting. So I guess it's just about distinguishing between which activities are stimulating and exciting and which activities are actually quite calming and conducive to going off to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just that sort of reflection on how does it, impact on me, as a young person or as an adult. Look, there's a message from Vanessa, a comment, I guess, around it's literally impossible to force your child to stop using devices or keep them out of the room. At 17, they're adults, so taking phone or laptop off them won't work and will end in arguments. Absolutely. And I think that's why Lise has been saying it's about negotiation. It's about drip feeding information around, wondering what the impact this might be having on your sleep. You're telling me you're really tired all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, once you're dealing with a young adult, you know, all of the kind of control and buffering that, you know, we have had as parents for many, many years kind of falls away. And it's more about that education piece and kind of supporting your young person. And I mean, ultimately it will get bad, and then they will want to change something, or they will find a way to cope and manage. You know, some people in my close network have terrible sleep habits, which is quite ironic, but they've found a way. They've found a way to function, and that's, you know, just something that they can do. I guess, you know, it's also, I do want to say, our society is really not built around this kind of adolescent delayed sleep pattern. There's a real push in some parts of the world, America in particular, to get later school start times. I think we're behind in Australia. I don't see that happening anytime soon, but it's actually kind of, you know, school start times and, you know, actually all school, you know, school hours haven't evolved for, you know, decades and decades, whereas our society has, and our knowledge around, you know, biological rhythms has as well. And so I think it's important to say that we're really not set up to accommodate, you know, these essentially night owls. You may have heard some people talk about morning larks and night owls. We generally can identify we're either a morning person or a night person. And for night people, you know, that it is associated with, you know, worse outcomes on, you know, physical health and, you know, social and emotional health. And that's really because of the way that society is set up, rather than any other reason, because they still have to get up for school and, you know, your standard work day and whatnot.
Yeah, and it's interesting when kids reach senior school too, you know, their classes are often starting at 8 o'clock in the morning, which just makes it even harder. Yeah. So there's another question here. I'm not sure whether that's going to fit for you to answer it, but any tips for helping a teenager to get sleep on Ritalin? Claire's son feels nauseous on melatonin, studying for his HSC, so he needs his medication and his sleep.
Yeah, look, that can be really difficult. And I guess the most common medications like that get prescribed for sleep problems are benzodiazepines. And they're really only recommended in the short term because it's sleeping pills. They just knock you out and help you go to sleep, but they can be quite addictive, and they don't actually deal with kind of the root cause of, you know, why somebody is not going to sleep. So I guess, you know, for the pharmacological treatments, that's really something that would need to be looked at by a GP and ideally a psychiatrist to look at how different medications interact.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And so let's talk a bit about what treatments work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, great. Okay, so the good news is that we actually do have really effective treatments. Psychological treatments are the first line, you know, the first line recommended treatments for insomnia, and in combination with bright light therapy for delayed sleep-wake phase disorder. So I'm going to talk about cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia. It's a behavioral intervention. I'll talk about it first. And essentially, it's usually pretty brief. It's usually delivered by a psychologist in kind of 6-ish sessions, you know, fewer for some people. And I guess the first component is really about that psychoeducation piece. You know, why is sleep important? What do you sleep, you know, what does your sleep patterns look like? You know, how might we go about setting, you know, consistent sleep-wake schedules? So I think one of the really important things in these behavioral treatments is getting up at the same time every day, and getting access or getting exposure to ideally natural light. It's a bit different in kind of the Northern Hemisphere where they don't have that much natural light through the winter, but getting exposure to natural light in the morning, because that kind of shuts down the melatonin, and it signals to your brain and body it's time to be awake, and it's associated with alertness. So that's the first thing. Sorry, there's just a helicopter overhead broadly here. So the next part is around sleep hygiene. So setting up your bed and your bedroom in a way that is going to be conducive to sleep. So some of the things that we would look at is making sure that it's dark, making sure that it's quiet. I know that for some people where you have got children who share rooms with siblings, sometimes many siblings, that can be a real challenge setting up the sleep environment. So I just want to acknowledge it's not always possible for a young person to have their own space to go to sleep in, but we would try and work out a way that there's a space that they can go to that is quiet. We would look at using the bed only for sleep. So not doing homework, not having a snack, not watching TV. Again, depends on the size of, somebody's home and what is possible. But really the recommendation is not to use the bed for anything except for sleep. And the idea there is that if you spend a lot of time in bed not sleeping, you learn to associate it with other things. So, the brain's really good at, pairing things together and using cues. So if you're in bed, doing homework, when you go to bed, you're going to start thinking about schoolwork. There's a whole literature around this kind of, contextual effect. So we really try and limit the bed for sleeping and sleep only. Importantly, if a young person has, a bedtime 10:30 and they're just not tired and they go to bed and they lie in bed for 2 hours, like what's going to happen? They're going to get frustrated. They're going to try harder to go to sleep, which has a paradoxical effect of making it less likely. They might start thinking about things that have happened during the day. They might start thinking about the exam they have the next day and start to worry that if they don't get to sleep soon, they're not going to perform very well. And actually the bed can become a place of anxiety and worry. And over time that perpetuates. So you go to bed and you're like, I'm not going to be able to go to sleep. All these terrible things might happen. And so like what we would do in this intervention is get young people to, and actually, this works for everyone. So if you're not a good sleeper, you can take this advice as well. If you're not getting to sleep after about 20, 30 minutes, get out of bed, read a book, move somewhere else, sit on a beanbag in your room if you don't have space that you can go to, wait until you're sleepy, and then get back into bed and try again. And we will keep doing that until a young person falls asleep. There's also something called sleep restriction therapy, which is part of a comprehensive, I'm going to call it CBTI, cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia, because otherwise it's a bit of a mouthful. And basically what that does is it creates a mild form of sleep deprivation over the short term. You only allow the young person to go to sleep for the number of hours that they previously slept. So say, for example, someone goes to bed at 10, they go to sleep at midnight, and then they get up at 7. You then recommend they go to sleep at midnight and still get up at 7. And so you're shortening their sleep window and it helps them get to sleep more easily. Once that's established, then you draw back the window to kind of a healthy number of hours, and you keep on drawing it out, and it works really well. It's a very difficult treatment to follow because it seems paradoxical, but what you're really doing is you're increasing the sleep efficiency. So you're helping, you're reducing the amount of time that young people spend in bed not asleep. The last kind of strategy that I'll talk about is the cognitive strategy. So this is helping people deal with worries that keep them up at night. So this can be sleep related. So if I don't fall asleep now, I'm going to perform really poorly tomorrow. I'm going to, flunk my basketball game. But it can also be just general worries about the day. So I've certainly had the experience where my day's been fine. It's like meetings and webinars and, all the fun stuff. Get home, have my dinner, get into bed, and then actually all this stuff from the day just comes into my head. And then I start thinking, did that webinar go okay? Did I cover all the material that I wanted to? And I'm going to start ruminating. I'm going to start turning things over in my mind. And that's actually, again, that's kind of stimulating, and that is not conducive to a good night's sleep. And so we do a lot of work around how to deal with worries that keep you awake at night and some strategies to manage those. So that's cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia, kind of in a nutshell. That's a very abridged version. I could talk about this for a long time, you can probably tell. And for delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, all those strategies work, and you would also sometimes use the addition of bright light therapy. So what that is first thing in the morning, you can use, there are these lights, or here we can just use natural sunlight, where somebody gets exposure to that light in the morning, and that actually helps shift their circadian rhythm, eventually helping them get to sleep a bit earlier.
Yeah, so wow. So it's good to know that there are effective treatments. It sounds like some of them are really going to need the help of a psychologist. It can be tricky to get in to see a psychologist. And I know that's part of the reason why you've been developing this app, the Sleep Ninja app, so to make this evidence-based sleep techniques available to everybody. Yeah, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm no software developer, and I definitely did not set out to develop an app when I started. I wanted to run a research trial when I became interested in sleep, looking at what happens with adolescents when you deliver them an intervention that is accessible. So one of the problems we have is we don't have nearly enough psychologists able to deliver these, available to deliver these interventions. Currently in Sydney at the moment, we're a big, obviously, metropolitan city. If you want to see a psychologist, you're looking at a 3 to 4 month wait. If you want to see a psychiatrist, that's about 6 months. And so it's very, very difficult to access these interventions. So I guess one of my research interests is looking at how we can use technology to improve the accessibility to, really good mental health information and treatments. And so I was looking for some kind of digital program that could be delivered to teenagers, delivering what I've just spoken about, CBTI, so to help with their sleep. And I'm really interested, not just at the disorder level, but any young person who's struggling with their sleep. I'm motivated to get in early, do prevention and early intervention work, target sleep, and then look at the effects on mental health. So I reviewed the literature. I tried to find a digital program I could use, and I found nothing. So there was not a single commercially available digital intervention specifically for teenagers. There are apps and programs, really great ones, available for adults, but nothing for teenagers. So naive me, I said, okay, well, we'll just develop one. How hard can it be? And I guess that led me to, along this path of developing the Sleep Ninja app. And basically what we did is we sat down with about 20 young people, about 20 parents, and we heard from them how they would like this information delivered. Would they use such a thing? I mean, one of the most common comments I get is, so you're using an app, like a digital thing to help with young people's sleep? Are you serious? But it's not designed to be used at night. So it's an intervention that is delivered during the day. It's called Sleep Ninja because young people, they really wanted it to be gamified. They wanted it to be fun. It's a chatbot. They said, there was a big wish list. We wanted to have a gamified component. We don't want to type anything. And we want it to be brief and kind of bite-sized. So we came up with this idea of a Sleep Ninja. The Sleep Ninja delivers 6 training sessions, and that's essentially the core therapeutic modules or components that I've just spoken about. And then the young person, moves through the training sessions or lessons, and they end up as a black belt in sleep. So with each level that they complete, they've mastered that level or belt, and then they progress to the next level. It uses a chatbot, so the young person doesn't have to type anything other than their name at the beginning, or whatever they would like to be called by the app. And then they can select, tell me more about that. I'm interested in this. This is an issue for me. And so it does personalize the content to what the young person wants, but we've also made sure that they get kind of the minimum required amount of information, I suppose, that we know is necessary for it to be effective, so to improve their sleep. There's also a sleep tracking component, so young people can, every morning, basically, the young person tells the app what time they need to get up in the morning for school or sport, and then the app gives them a recommended bedtime based on the sleep guidelines. And then an hour before they are meant to go to sleep, the app says, hey, it's time to start your wind down routine. I'm going to say goodnight for the night, and then the app is actually no longer usable for the 1 hour before bed. And there's a range of suggestions that the young person can personalize to what they want to do for their nighttime routine. So standard stuff, have a shower, have a cup of tea, read a book, and there's options that they can personalize and put in what they like to do before bed. They get that reminder, and then in the morning, the Ninja asks them, how did they sleep? They input about what time they went to sleep, got into bed, went to sleep, woke up, got out of bed, and then the app will actually calculate both their sleep efficiency and the number of hours slept, and then it graphs it for them so they can actually see how they're progressing over time. So I guess those are the two kind of core components of the app. There's a section where there's sleep tips, things that young people can do during the day. They can swipe through and like the ones that resonate with them. Young people tell us they like the tips the most. That's not the therapeutic content, but I guess that's really good for engagement. And there's some kind of extra information in there for parents. And I guess it's really exciting for me to be kind of, it's not the end of my journey. In some ways, it's only the beginning, but to see this app go through a co-design process. We ran a pilot study with 50 young people and we interviewed them after to see how we could make it as best as we could. Then I ran a randomized controlled trial with about 250 young people, and we showed that actually the young people who got the app reported improvements in sleep, depression and anxiety, both after using the app and then actually 2 months later. So it's kind of a longer term effect. I guess my interpretation of that is they really are taking some of these suggestions and embedding them into their lives and kind of building on those healthy sleep patterns. And so now, as a scientist, I'm satisfied that I've got the evidence that I need to, with a clear mind, release it into the community. And now we've just released it, I think it was last week. And it's free. Anyone can download it. I'd encourage you as parents to take a look before, take a look, see if you think it's something that might resonate with your child. It's really exciting to be at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a really beautifully designed app. It is very engaging. There's a link to it in the chat box. And, the good thing, sometimes with apps, you never know, what research is behind them, whether they're evidence-based or where they come from. With this, that Elisa's put, and her team have put the research behind it. And we know that it contains all the good evidence-based strategies in a really consumable way that really engages teenagers and young people.
I'll just say each of the lessons takes about 5 minutes to complete, so it's a pretty what we would call like a low intensity intervention. It doesn't require a great deal of time, and I guess that's what we heard from young people. They want to be able to do something wherever they want to, and they don't want to spend a huge amount of time engaging with it. I guess the flip side to that is it's not the answer. It's not the solution to all sleep problems. We're kind of recommending it for mild to moderate sleep problems, but for young people with more severe sleep difficulties and sort of diagnosed sleep disorders, it can certainly assist, but also speaking to a GP or a psychologist is really important.
And it might be a good way to start, mightn't it? Because a lot of the strategies in it are what a psychologist would tell you to do. So, if you're waiting to see a psychologist for this issue, you could start, using the app and, getting some of these good, healthy routines in place, and then getting assistance with perhaps some of the other strategies like sleep restriction, that might be necessary for those more severe presentations.
Chris, I've just noticed that somebody's asked, does the app rely on the teen being truthful? It does. So the app can only do, like with its algorithms, what the young person inputs into it. But that said, if a young person says that they are going to bed, or they are going to bed after they're going to sleep, obviously that's impossible. So we do have kind of some inbuilt checks to make sure that it is valid. But at the end of the day, if a young person tells us that they need to get up at midday for school, the app unfortunately is not smart enough to know that that is an impossibility.
So again, with all of these strategies, it is reliant upon a teenager who is willing to engage with it and play by the rules.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. If somebody doesn't want to work on their sleep, no amount of beautiful graphics or conversation about it is going to change that. There might need to be some other catalyst for that young person. So I guess, you don't want to be too forceful, but at the same time, I guess it's a good thing to know that is available should there be the right time for it.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing that you've got it down into such bite-sized pieces that did you say 5 minutes? And that it's effective, like to be able to just sort of shrink psychological treatment down to such small bite-sized pieces and for it to be effective, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? And important for young people who appear to have diminishing attention spans. Yeah. So I might just get Eugene to flick the slide up that shows some of the other resources as well. So we've got, there's a link in the chat to Sleep Ninja, but you can also see it there. But there's some other resources that are also, reliable, that you can depend upon, that are evidence-based. So This Way Up has a free program for insomnia for adults, so not suitable for young people. But if you're, as an adult, a parent having sleep problems, then correcting your sleep problems is going to be one of the best ways that you can help your young person. So, and that's free and it's online and a really good product. I love the Raising Children's network, the Australian parenting website, because honestly, everything is in there. If I'm researching stuff for my own life or for work, I always have a look at there because all the information is really helpful. Eliza, do you want to speak to the other two?
Yeah, sure. So the Centre for Clinical Interventions is run out of the University of Western Australia. It's a clinical centre staffed by clinical psychologists, and the resources on their website are brilliant. So they've got really nice, single page psychoeducation piece of paper in my day. Now they're digital. But they do have really great resources that you can look at for yourself and also for young people. There's an insomnia workbook. So that's like a cognitive behavior therapy self-help program that you can work through yourself without that's just kind of self-guided. It is all kind of old school on paper, but you can do it digitally. You can edit PDFs. And then I'll talk about, so the Woolcock is a sleep clinic in Sydney. It's affiliated with the University of Sydney. There are sleep physiologists, there are clinical psychologists with expertise in sleep, there are psychiatrists, and there are academics. Previously, and there's a sleep lab, so I guess for any kind of significant sleep problems, they do sleep studies and sleep research, as well as treatment. Since the pandemic, they've opened up their telehealth, they've opened up all of their clinicians to telehealth consultations. Obviously, for a sleep study, that's not going to work, but now it is an amazing clinic. I would say it's probably like one of the leading in Australia. So if you are extremely concerned about your young person, get in touch with the Woolcock, see if you can speak to somebody there, because they are, that is the main thing that they do. That is the one and only thing that they do.
Fantastic. So I might pass over to Natalie now, because we've got some more questions in the Q&A. Thank you, Eliza. So interesting. Over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Eliza. I think, we've got a few questions in there just in regards to sleep. And I think Rich is just asking, what if they fall asleep easily but wake up after 3 hours and can't get back to sleep? Is there any strategies for that?
Yeah, so look, normal sleep is peppered by waking up during the night. That is totally normal. So the first thing that I would say is that, if you think back to when you had a little baby, if you've ever watched them on a monitor, they wake up all through the night. I know this very well at the moment. And for us as adults, for the most part, we actually don't even remember it. We wake up and then we go back to sleep. If you have like Google Home have all of these cameras and stuff now. If you ever, watch yourself asleep, if you can video it, it's not, you think that you go to sleep and you stay asleep and you don't move, but actually there is a whole lot of activity going on. Your brain is incredibly active, you move around a lot during rapid eye movement sleep or REM. Your brain activity, your body's paralyzed, but your brain activity is significant. You can see your eyes darting around. So I guess the first thing that I'd say is that night waking is really common. It really is about getting back to sleep. So I guess I'd be asking, are there thoughts or things that are coming into your child's mind that they might be worried about that kind of gets them a bit worked up? Spending a lot of time in bed and not asleep is not that helpful. So what I'd say is, if you wake up in the night, child wakes up in the night, they really struggle getting back to sleep, after 10, 15 minutes, get out of bed and do something else. Put on a dim light out of the bed, read a book, have a cup of tea if you want to mess around with the kettle, do something else until you feel tired, and then try again. Because the problem with staying in bed and not sleeping is that frustration, and you try harder to go back to sleep. And clock checking is also unhelpful. It's something that it's very hard not to do, but turn around a clock, take your phone out of the room. It's better not to know, and just kind of, if you feel like you've been awake for a while, get up, do something else, wait until you get that kind of, fatigue feeling, eyelids heavy, get back into bed, try again.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We've got Alana is just asking, what are the issues around trying to shift a teen with a biological late cycle to an early cycle? And does it have any impact on the hormones in generally? So like you're saying, I think, in teenagers obviously going through puberty, there's also that shift. I'm not going to tell my children that one because they'll use that, I think. But also, yeah, she's just wanting to know in regards to impact on hormones, if getting up earlier and they're sort of more that night owl.
Yeah, look, so there's no long-term negative effects on trying to shift your cycle. There's no hormonal reasons why you shouldn't do that. I mean, that is the treatment, for sleep-wake phase disorder. But most young people who show this, young people show this shift, but most young people actually don't have a disorder. It's just a natural shift. And for a lot of young people, it's exacerbated by the social component, because they want to be out with their friends, or they need to be doing exams, or there's some kind of social reason why they are staying up late, and then you kind of just get into that pattern. I guess like what I think a good compromise is, and sorry, let me just say, like for most teenagers by early adulthood, it's settled down and they've shifted back. So there really is kind of this short window. And I guess, yeah, what I was going to say is the compromise is, trying to not allow them to shift more than 2 hours. So the weekend sleep-ins can really become problematic because they just perpetuate the cycle. If you have a young person that sleeps in till midday, 1 p.m., they're not going to develop enough sleep debt until even later the next night, and even later the Sunday night after. But then they got to get up at 7 or whatever time it is for school. And so that is unhelpful. It's more about making sure that they do still get up, within that 2 hour window, or working with them, negotiating with them, talking to them about whether that would, that could be something worth trying. Because the other thing is, if you're getting resistance, try it out. Try something, see if you can enlist your teenagers' cooperation for a week to try it out and get them to see the benefits. Because if they experience the benefits firsthand, they might, that's a much more compelling argument than you telling them something. This I know.
Yeah, and I think it leads to Catherine's questions, and I think that's something that I know as parents that we've looked at. That sort of negotiation, and because Catherine's going, what do you do if you've missed the boat and you now have older teens that look you right in the eye after you've just tried to talk to them about all of what you've just explained, and they just roll their eyes back at you. And I understand, Catherine, I'm the shortest in the family now, but for us, I think taking your advice there, Eliza, on that sort of communication and negotiation, and we've sort of been able to touch wood this year, sort of try to do that where phones are out of the room by 9 o'clock, we sort of said. And so just to give you a bit of time to wind down and relax and get ready, and touch wood, I'm not saying it's going to last, but it's been working. And then the weekends there's a bit more free time and that, but just during school time, that's something we've found that's been helpful. But it is hard. I hear that a lot from parents when the teenagers are bigger and older and just look at you like, what do you know, mum and dad?
Yeah, and I completely acknowledge that. I guess in my clinical work with young people who often get brought in by their parents and actually don't want to be there, like my approach is very much, look, you're here now, we may as well test something out. Doesn't work for you, no worries, we've had a go. And so I guess, if that approach could work, and again, like really trying to play into like what do they care about? Is it sports performance? Is it appearance? Is it health? Is it, like what are some of those nuggets that you might be able to use as a way to get them interested in it?
Yeah, and I think that we've got just another 2 questions, and then we might wrap up. But someone's just put in there, can you give us some tips to deal with the worries and the brain going into overdrive when you get into bed, or if you wake up early in the morning? And I think you sort of touched on this earlier, just when you just keep thinking and the brain just doesn't sort of shut off.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned that sort of after half an hour, get up or do something.
Yes. So problems seem much worse when you wake up at night and you think about them. One of the functions of sleep is it's kind of like it assists with emotion regulation. And I've certainly had the experience of waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning with this terrible problem that I just cannot solve. And then I go back to sleep and I wake up in the morning and I think, oh, why was I so concerned about that? The solution is right in front of me. So I guess, like knowing that sleep is really important for that. But I mean, a couple of things that you can do at the time. So if you have a young person for whom worrying and thinking a lot at night in the lead up to going to sleep is an issue, it's really about trying to get those worries out of your head before bedtime. So dealing with them earlier. Don't know if they're going to be willing to share what they are over dinner, but certainly something we do with young people is, if they are saying that they ruminate and they worry a lot at night, and that's actually what keeps them at night, so recommend they do something called like worry time. That might be, I don't know if that's familiar or not, but it's setting aside 5 minutes during the day where they are allowed to worry and think about all of the problems as much as they want to. Some people will write it down in a journal. Some people, there's an app called Worry Time, and the only thing it does is it just says, hey, now it's time for you to worry, and you write down all your worries and then you get rid of it. And I guess what that does is, when worries pop into your mind, you can think, oh, I'll just deal with that at worry time, and to get that out before bed, because if that's the time that you start to think about all of these things, that is a lot to be going on in the lead up to trying to go to sleep. So we suggest, try and do that earlier in the day when you just come home from school or whatever it might be. Works for some people, not for others. It's quite a contrived thing. Often some people know that if they have the opportunity to worry, they actually don't need to. They're like, oh, it's good, it's there, I can do it if I need to. But that's kind of one strategy. And I have to say, in the moment, there is an absolute place for distraction. So people think, oh, distracting away from your worries and emotions is a bad thing. That's not the case. There is absolutely a time and a place for it. And during the night is one of those times and places. So if you are worried about something, read a book, look at a magazine, do something that is going to take your mind away. For some people, meditation and mindfulness really works for them in kind of disengaging from your minds and just kind of being in the moment and present in your body. Some people don't like mindfulness, that's fine. Listening to relaxation music or tracks, guided relaxation, anything that kind of takes your mind away from what it is that is worrying you, because in the morning it's going to be, you're going to be able to deal with it much better after a good night's sleep.
Great. And we've just got one more question. Comes up from Alana. Have you seen any positive results from teens using tech like smartwatches or rings that log sleep?
Oh, I'm so glad I have this question. So this is really interesting. Like the reliability of kind of objectively measured sleep is improving, but it's still nowhere near as reliable as actigraphy, kind of the scientific way that you measure sleep, like electrodes on your heads and things like that. But what matters for young people's sleep is their perception of how they slept, not actually the reality. So if someone thinks they've had a good night's sleep, that affects their performance and their mood to a much greater extent than how they actually slept. So I'm not talking about people who experience like severe sleep deprivation or shift workers, but generally, I guess the double-edged sword with these kinds of objective measures is if you get a graph that tells you you had a great night's sleep, regardless of whether you did or not, that's actually going to be a really positive thing for you in your day. And they've done these really amazing experimental studies where they give people they do sleep studies and then they give people false feedback on how well they slept, and actually how they actually slept doesn't really matter for the most part, at least over 1 to 2 nights. It's their perception of their sleep. So I don't know if I've exactly answered the question. I find this area really fascinating. You can probably tell. I guess I wouldn't be relying on these kind of objective measures as the ground truth. They are imperfect. They do correlate with more reliable sleep measures, but I probably wouldn't be reading into them too much, because actually how somebody thinks they slept is much more important.
Great. Thank you so much, Zzz and Christine, for being with us here tonight. I think that was our last question. So that's been fantastic. We've been able to wrap that up on time. And I just want to thank you, for joining us on the panel and sharing with us, your expertise and knowledge. We're really grateful to have you here with us tonight. And just to everyone else, thank you for joining us tonight as well. We understand that everyone's quite busy, but we do really hope that you've found this webinar to be helpful for you and hopefully your children's, for healthier sleep habits. Don't forget also just to check out some of those resources and also the Sleep Ninja app as well. So for those of you that are with us, you'll be directed to a survey at the end of this webinar, and we'd really appreciate your feedback on tonight's webinar. The recording of it will be available in approximately about 1 week on our website, and you'll receive an email notification about this. So again, thank you all for joining us this evening. Good night. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care, and hopefully you all have a really good night's sleep. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.